going to show you guys today how to perform a VLOOKUP within Microsoft Excel, but also, more importantly, I'm going to show you how it can go wrong and why you might not want to use a VLOOKUP. Okay, so to start with, we'll assume you have two different data sets in two different workbooks, could be across two different tabs, and within each one you'll have a unique identifier, and this will be where you actually pivot your VLOOKUP from, and then we'll create a column and put the additional data in. So in this example I have stock information for different products that we're stocking. In here we have the actual cost pricing, retail pricing, etc, etc. There's a bunch of zeros in most of this data set, but then we have a few here. So we can see that we have 8 in stock and what the retail value is and what the cost value is and so forth. So what I would like to do is then bring in sales information into this data set so that we can then see for all the products that we currently stock, which have performed well and which ones haven't performed well. In order to do that, you'd want to basically perform a VLOOKUP. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at our sales data, which is this document here. And again, we have our SKU codes, our unique identifiers in column B. We have the quantity that we sold, the cost of goods that were sold, and then the total sales. So this is the column that we'll be bringing in using this. So the first thing we're going to do is go back over to our stock information here, and we're going to add a new column called sales. In fact, actually I'm going to call it total sales. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is create the VLOOKUP. And there's many different ways you might want to do this. For me, the easiest way is to just actually type it in, find the function and double click it. Now this by default then sets you up. It puts in the parentheses, the open bracket as needed, and then starts the formula. So the first part of the VLOOKUP, if we take away the J, it says the lookup value. The lookup value is always going to be your unique identifier. So you'd click on to your unique identifier and it would populate it into the formula bar here. Hit comma, and then that takes you to the next part of the formula, which is the table array. Now the table array is the source document where your information that you're trying to pull into this document actually sits. So to do that, we would then bring up the sales data and select everything from column B across to total sales. And then this basically then tells Excel that we want to find our lookup value, our unique ID, in this document within columns B and H. Now if I did select A to start with and change that to A to H, the formula would not work. And the reason for that is your lookup value has to be in the very first column of your table data, your table array. So we'll always have to make sure that you have the starting of your table array as column B, where your unique identifiers are, so that basically B matches B in this case. So your lookup value equals the very first column of your table array. The next part of this formula is the column index number, and basically the way that a VLOOKUP works is you find your unique identifier within this table, within this first column. Then you can count how many columns there are across and pull back this particular piece of information. So in this particular case, I want the total sales. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we type in a number 7. A comma. Now this one here gives you two options. I've never used the true function ever. I've only ever used the false one. under very few circumstances would you ever need to use true, so you'd always type in false, or when this option comes up here you can just double click it and that gives you false. Then you just want to either press enter or add a close bracket. So if I just type in false there, close bracket, and then press enter, this has now brought back 99.9. Now I can just format that very quickly into a currency, and that's actually 99.90. So for this particular unique identifier ending in 692, so if I go over to here, find that 692 and it's 99.90. Okay, so we know that that's pulling through correctly, and what we can do is just double tap that and copy that formula all the way down, and now it's brought in every single record. Okay, there's a few things within this formula to just point out and make everyone aware of. We have not anchored down the unique identifier, which means I cannot copy this formula to the right without breaking it. Okay, so that would not work because now it's jumped over to C. So to fix that, you could just anchor in the letter B, but do not anchor in the number of the row, because we still want to copy it down. We want the row numbers to change. What we don't want to change is the letter. We don't want to change the column reference in this scenario. We want to make sure that our table array is also locked down with the dollar signs in there to make sure that when we copy the formula over to the right, for example, it's not going to shift where we're actually looking at the information. And the rest of this formula wouldn't change dynamically, so that's perfectly fine. So now if I pull this across here, we'll know that now the formula is static. It has completely fixed that in and is working. And the reason that you might want to do this is now I can change that to becoming a number 5, and I have pulled in a different reference point straight from our data source here. So if that was 7, that COGS, a cost of goods sold, has now been brought into our stock values as well. So we sold, in essence, £39 worth of stock, and we made sales of 99. Okay, and again we can copy that down if we want to. Now the problem that we start having, well, actually before I get to that, let's talk about this formula in a little bit more detail. So the way that a VLOOKUP works is you have the value, you have a table that you're looking into, you have a column reference, and then you want to know if you want an approximate match or an exact match. Now, if I bring in what we've done here, so we have the B2, which is our unique identifier, and we're looking for it within our data source, and we know that we are counting out for the total sales, so the 7th column in our data source, and we want it to be an exact match. Now this in theory works perfectly well and perfectly fine. It works better if you actually have it across 2 tabs, and it can fail if you have it in different workbooks, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I go to our data sales data, and then close this, let's just save it for argument's sake. Now our formula here has changed. It's now showing an entire path to, or true path to the data source. If the document that you're referencing now moves location, then this formula would fail. It would no longer work. So for example, I will go ahead and make that change. So if I go to my desktop and go to YouTube and my data, sales data, right? So now if I just change the file name to become in sales data 1, then this data now, although it looks okay currently, is not referencing anything. So if I save this file down and close it, then bring up my stock values again, This workbook contains links to one or more external sources that could be unsafe, so we'll just say let's update it. And we can't update some of the links in your workbook right now. And basically it's because it can no longer find the workbook that we were referencing, and this VLOOKUP therefore will fail. So if we edit the link, we can see that this is the one here that it's struggling to find. And we have a few options. We can obviously break those links and make them just static values, or we can try to change the source, which is probably the easiest way of going about it. And there we go, we can now see that it's actually changed its name. If we click on that and then click change, and then just close there. So now we can see that the formula has then gone through and changed the name on those formulas. Now I'm going to close this. I'm not going to save it. We'll go back and open our... Actually, before we do that, we're going to change the name of our sales data back to what it was before, and then we're going to open the sales data. Okay. The other way that a VLOOKUP can go wrong is I have only got the sales data open. If I'm just working inside the sales data and I'm think to myself, oh, I want to add an additional column just here, and just say add funds, I don't know, something random like that. Now I save this down. It's still called sales data, so we haven't altered that in any way, shape or form. However, if I now go to open up the stock values data sheet, where we're pulling in the original formula to pull in the total sales, we'll now notice that it's a bunch of zeros, because this is still looking at the sales data B to H, and it's looking for the 7th column in that data table. Now in our sales data table, B to H is now here, which means we've isolated and knocked out the total sales from our VLOOKUP in essence. And this is the primary reason why I would never use a VLOOKUP. I find that you pull into question the integrity of what you're trying to do within your workbook, and you basically open yourself up to potential issues. And a good example of that is if I put data here. Actually, let's say this was discount, okay, and let's say we had 20% of our 20% of our total sales were discount. What am I doing wrong there? What's if I... if I actually use a 0. There we go. Now, if I pop that in to say that that was the discount that I gave away, when I go to my stock data where I actually brought this data in, those are not the total sales. But if I didn't make those changes, I wouldn't know about it. Also, it basically just allows your work within your workbook here to have the potential to go wrong, and quite significantly, because you have no control necessarily over what happens within your lookup table. More so if it's a communal document that it's on SharePoint and people are using it, making alterations and so forth. So this is pretty much the primary reason why I would never use a VLOOKUP. Instead, I would go and use a index match formula, which would guarantee 100% you'll only ever pull in the receipt, the values that you're you're actually looking for. And to perform one is not too dissimilar. It's pretty standard. So if we say, right, so we are looking for the total sales. Okay, we still have our unique identifier, and it is pretty basic to use these same parameters that you'd have in a VLOOKUP, only you use basically 3 different formulas to get there. So the first thing you'll need to do, if I break this down into a couple of different parts, is you'd create a formula called match, and basically match, it brings back the location of the reference. So if our lookup value is our unique identifier and our table array is still our data, sales data here, what you're looking for is you're looking for the unique identifier in column B, and you want that to be an exact match, so a 0, and then press enter. Right, so this formula now tells me this is a row number. Okay, this is the row number in which this particular reference is within the data set. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is create a column number. Okay, and to do this, you'll do the same process, except this time we're going to look for headers rather than a unique identifier down the column B. So instead, what we'll do is we'll go equals match. This time I'm going to select K1, as in I want the name of total sales within our data source. So just row 1, and we want it to be an exact match. Press enter on that. Now I know 2 pieces of information. I know that the value of total sales is in row 2, column 9. So then all I need to do is create the index that takes those 2 numbers into account, right? So if I go equals index, open up a bracket, first of all, you start with the entire array that you're looking for. So to do this, we'd go over to our sales data, and again, it doesn't matter where you start in this scenario, so I can select absolutely everything, okay, because I still know it's in row 2, and I know it's in column 9, regardless to where I start my array. The only thing you will have to make sure that you definitely have in your array are obviously the row and the column that you're referencing. So for safety, I just tended to select absolutely everything. And then you need the row number, which we know is a 2, and then a column number, which we know is a 9. So if I just do that, we can see that I get the 99.9 if I change that to currency, which is what we had before the VLOOKUP went wrong. Okay, now you might be thinking, well, that's not very dynamic. We need to type in a 2 and a 9, right? Well, what you do is you take these formulas that you've created here and you actually embed them into your index formula. So a 2 goes there, and you still get to that 99, and our column reference goes at the end just here, and there we go, still getting our 99.90. Now the other thing to just bear in mind, what you'll need to do is put in your $signs just here, because you want to make sure that your reference does not move column. You want it to go down the rows, so you just make sure you anchor in the letter and not the number. We've already got our data source anchored in. Now our reference value for the column that we want, well, we want it to shift column, but we don't want it to shift rows. So instead we put a $just in the front of the number and not the letter. This will allow us to have multiple different columns with multiple different references, and copy the formulas down without those formulas breaking. We make sure that the reference here is also anchored in with some $signs, and that is it. Now I can grab this formula move over to here where I'd like it to be. We're just going to delete those out because we don't need them. Arguably we don't need those. So now, if I come over to our sales data quickly, and I can see all of these other things. So I want all of this, okay? And I copy those. I then come over to my stock values, and I paste those headers in. Now this formula can now bring in all of that information in one go. I don't need to adjust anything. I can copy that up, down, left, right, and it will always bring back whatever it finds within the columns that have those headers against those unique identifiers in column B. And this formula, although it looks quite daunting, is a just hell of a lot more secure than any VLOOKUP that you might want to be performing. It also kind of works in the same respect as the HLOOKUP and a VLOOKUP combined, because, or you know, a lot of people, I guess, have been talking about XLOOKUPs and things like that. I would still always lean towards doing a index match solely because it's going to give you the most accurate way of referencing your data, and you can pull it in. Obviously it can still go wrong if someone moves the location of a file or changes the name of a file, but when someone interacts with the source document and move columns around or anything like that, this method will secure your information to make sure you're always pulling in the correct sales data in this example. So I hope you guys found this useful. I'll just type this out so you can kind of see what that actually looks like. So it's basically index wrapped in some parentheses, the table array, then match 1, which is your row matching, and then the second one, which is optional, is for your column referencing. And I say, any queries, leave me a comment in the video below, and I'll get back to you. Any examples that you want me to work on future videos, etc., let me know, and I will also mock up some examples on those. But hopefully you guys found this useful, and I'll catch you in the next video. Cheers.